what if I told you the dollar wasn't always destined to dominate the world? In 1944, 44 nations gathered to tie their currencies to the US dollar. But hidden in this agreement was a ticking time bomb that nearly brought the whole system crashing down. What was this fatal flaw? And how did the dollar survive beyond it? The dollar's birth. In 1944, the world was at a crossroads. The devastation of World War II had left entire countries in ruins, their economies shattered, their treasuries depleted. Cities across Europe lay in rubble, while trade routes and supply chains that once fueled national coffers were cut to pieces. Japan faced starvation-level shortages, its industries paralyzed. Even powerful nations like Britain were drowning in debt, clinging to rations and loans just to stay afloat. Everywhere you looked, the global economy was in disarray, except for one place, the United States. Unlike most of the world, American factories hadn't been bombed. Instead, they ramped up production during the war, churning out weapons, machinery, and supplies on an unprecedented scale. While soldiers returned home to rebuild civilian life, they came back to intact infrastructure, a healthy economy, and enormous gold reserves. In fact, by the war's end, the U.S. held nearly two-thirds of the world's gold supply, an unparalleled financial advantage that made it a natural cornerstone for rebuilding the international monetary system. But central to that system would be a bold gamble, and not everyone was convinced it would work. Delegates from 44 allied nations met at a small resort in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, tasked with designing a global financial order. The idea was simple in theory, yet ambitious in execution. Create a system where foreign currencies would all be tied to one anchor, the US dollar, and in turn, the dollar would be backed by gold. This meant that any nation could exchange dollars for gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce, a promise backed by America's vast reserves. It sounds neat and tidy, but in 1944, this deal required an enormous leap of faith. For the United States, the agreement cemented its financial leadership on the global stage. Its currency wasn't just the backbone of domestic trade anymore. It was now the linchpin of international exchange. For other nations, though, the stakes were high. By aligning their currencies to the dollar, they were tying their economic stability to Washington's fiscal policies. And in theory, as long as America stayed prudent and its gold reserves remained plentiful, the system could work. That was the hope. For a while, it seemed to deliver. However, there was one critical flaw buried in the heart of this design. To keep the system functional, the world needed a steady and growing supply of US dollars. Nations needed dollars for trade, investment, and rebuilding. But here's the paradox. The more dollars America printed to meet this global demand, the thinner the connection between the dollar and its gold backing became. This was the Triffin Dilemma, a problem first outlined by economist Robert Triffin. With every dollar that left America's borders, the risk of running out of gold to back those dollars grew higher. It was like trying to support an expanding house of cards with a dwindling foundation. This dynamic planted the seeds of instability. By the 1960s, cracks in the system were starting to show. A handful of nations, worried that America might not have enough gold to fulfill its $35 per ounce promise, began demanding physical gold in exchange for their reserve dollars. The math was becoming uncomfortable. If enough countries called in the same favor, the U.S. risked draining its reserves completely, bringing the entire Bretton Woods system to its knees. Still, in those early years, the dollar's role as global anchor seemed immutable. It wasn't just a currency. It was a beacon of stability during a chaotic time. The world had never seen such a united framework for managing international trade and exchange rates. And for nearly 3 decades, this system underpinned a post-war world that saw rapid economic recovery and growth. But no experiment lasts forever. The fragile nature of Bretton Woods points us to a pivotal moment in the dollar's story, one that would change everything: the Nixon Shock. It was a move that would break the dollar's tie to gold, redefine its role, and raise a critical question. Would the dollar survive such a dramatic shift, or would it crumble under the weight of its contradictions? From collapse to supremacy. In 1971, the unthinkable happened. After nearly 3 decades of serving as the backbone of the global financial system, the U.S. announced it would no longer convert dollars into gold. This was the Nixon Shock, a move that sent ripples across the world economy. Overnight, the promise that had underpinned the Bretton Woods system evaporated. Global currencies, once tied predictably to the dollar and backed by gold, were suddenly left to float freely. Their values determined by markets and speculation rather than fixed agreements. For many nations, this was a moment of chaos. Without the stability of a gold anchor, trust in the dollar seemed perilously close to collapse. The reaction was immediate. Central banks scrambled to adjust. Markets hesitated, and questions swirled. How could a currency that no longer promised real, physical value maintain dominance? For America, the short-term risks were enormous. If global confidence in the dollar crumbled, it could spell the end of its role at the center of international trade. Yet, instead of fading into irrelevance, the dollar emerged from this crisis stronger and more entrenched than ever before. The question is, how? The answer begins with oil. In the 1970s, the world was facing an energy crisis, with oil emerging as one of the most vital resources for economies everywhere. The U.S. leadership saw an opportunity and struck a deal that would reshape the dollar's role. The arrangement was simple but strategic. Saudi Arabia, the largest producer in OPEC, agreed to price all its oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. In exchange, the United States promised military protection and economic investment for the kingdom. Soon, other oil-producing nations followed suit, and the petrodollar system was born. Here's why this mattered. With oil prices denominated only in dollars, any nation wanting to buy crude oil had to first secure U.S. currency. This meant a constant global demand for dollars, regardless of whether the greenback had gold backing or not. The system became self-reinforcing. Nations stockpiled dollars to purchase oil, and these dollars often found their way back to the United States in the form of investments, what we now call recycling petrodollars. Foreign governments and institutions channeled their surplus dollars into U.S. Treasury bonds, real estate, and other financial assets, further strengthening the dollar's position. But there was another, deeper dynamic at play. The dollar was benefiting from what economists call network effects. Think of it like social media. A platform only becomes more powerful as more people sign up, creating a kind of gravity that pulls in even more users. The dollar functions the same way. Once it became the currency used for global trade, its central role was nearly impossible to challenge. It wasn't just for oil. International contracts for everything from machinery to grain were denominated in dollars. Banks used dollars as their standard currency for cross-border transactions. From debt issuance to foreign reserves, the dollar dominated almost every corner of global finance. Setting up an alternative system seemed unthinkable. Take foreign exchange, FX markets as an example. They're among the largest financial markets in the world, and the US dollar is involved in around 88% of all trades. That kind of liquidity, having so many buyers and sellers at the ready, is hard to replicate. For nations and businesses, sticking with the dollar wasn't just convenient, it was practical. It minimized costs, reduced risks, and ensured access to enormous pools of capital. By adapting to the circumstances of the 1970s, the dollar didn't just survive, it adapted and thrived. The petrodollar system and these network effects gave it resilience that a gold-backed currency could never achieve. It moved beyond being a symbol of trust tied to physical wealth and became a currency sustained by the trust in America's political, military, and economic power. Rather than being weakened by the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement, the dollar used it as a jumping-off point to cement itself even deeper into the framework of global finance. But this newfound dominance came with consequences. It wasn't just about controlling trade. The dollar's centrality gave the United States a potent tool, one that went far beyond economics. Where the story goes next reveals how the dollar could enforce global priorities, but also how it carries the risk of overreach. The dollar's dominance didn't originate in gold alone. It grew out of something far more enduring: trust, strategy, and sheer scale. Gold was a beginning, but military alliances, market liquidity, and the necessity of oil secured its throne. Today, over half of global reserves remain in dollars, and its influence stretches far beyond markets into diplomacy and power. But as nations consider alternatives, China's yuan, digital currencies, or de-dollarization, another question emerges. Can the dollar evolve again, as it has so many times before? Or are we on the cusp of a new financial order? The dollar story isn't over. What comes next is unwritten. Thank you for watching.